Hey, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. The Inmate Alliance welcomes you to a live broadcast of The Insider. My goal is to give you the truth about the federal prison system. Not something everybody wants to talk about, but oh my goodness, what a cesspool. So I'm here to tell you what those behind the wall need to know every week and enlighten those outside the wall. So if you're an inmate, a former inmate, family member, a loved one, buckle up because, folks, you just can't make this stuff up every other week. So here we go. Well, Director Mitchell looks like he has his work cut out for him. No staff cooperation. Well, maybe you ought to fire them all. I don't know if you can do that, but you might. But if you could, but maybe the president will loan you some National Guard troops to watch the hen house while you design and implement reforms. And what an interesting thought, because the pushback is coming from the staff, not from Director Mitchell. So how would you design a new game plan? Well, first thing would be to design a psychological profile and a testing criteria for corrections officers. Second would be to replace the counseling team, the do-nothing people, with competent, capable personnel from the corrections officer profile. You're going to find some people who are smart enough to do that. And then you're going to have to do the same thing for the management team at each facility. I use a case in point. The warden at the facility where I was housed used to be the rec officer. Yeah, the recreation officer. That certainly qualifies him to be a respected member of the management team or the head of the facility. This is the guy that would stand up there like a buffoon and boast that he had never, ever approved a request for compassionate release. I don't know that that's something to be boasting about. That's a right of each and every prisoner to petition for that, and it's his responsibility to make sure that he is making a competent, capable decision. Apparently, that's not in his wheelhouse. So if he's not gone yet, he ought to be gone. And there's no room for incompetence at any level in a federal prison. You are responsible for 160,000 people at 120 facilities across the country. That's no small task. And to do that, this director is trying to do the right things, push the reform, get things moving, and he has got this group behind, pushing the other way while he's trying to accomplish good things. That is not a recipe for success. And I think one of the other things is you must pay a competitive wage in order to get good people. If you're sitting there going, well, gee, should I be a corrections officer at the federal prison or should I work at McDonald's? That's not a particularly good situation to be in. Because you're not going to get good people. You're not going to get the right kind of people to do this job. It is a difficult job. And all you got to do is look at the Stanford study back in the 70s where they attempted to divide people into groups. They had people who were inmates and people who were guards. It didn't last very long before they would at each other's throats. So it takes a particular kind of person that needs to be doing that job. And the same thing goes with the medical and mental health staff. You can't pay half the going rate for a physician or a physician's assistant or a medical practitioner or nurse practitioner and expect to get good quality people. Folks, it just does not happen. So, those are things that I think need to be done, and they need to be done immediately. It's more than just housing federal prisoners, which some of the stuff that goes into that is just an absolute joke. It's 8,000 veterans who should be in a VA hospital getting the right kind of mental health treatment instead of sitting rotting in a federal penitentiary or federal prison without any kind of mental health resources available to them. So, there are, I don't know how many thousands of illegal immigrants who I'm sure would much rather be in their home country than in a federal prison. But the bottom line is we're spending resources, the government's spending resources, we're spending resources as citizens for a system that could so easily be reformed. Here's another one. Director Mitchell is trying to get the First Step Act and Second Chance Act piggybacked and working. He's having a heck of a time. I mean, they're calculating the good time by hand. That's absolutely ridiculous. Go to any number of community colleges and get a young person out of the computer program and have them write an algorithm to calculate it. We're not talking rocket science. What we're talking is resistance to any kind of change. If you simply implemented the First Step Act as intended, piggybacked with the Second Chance Act, and the good time that is allowed for minimum to low income prisoners, you could reduce this prison population by probably 60,000 people. What a novel idea. And then with the money that's left over, you can start implementing the hiring of good people to work in these facilities. They're there. They're available, and if you make it the pay attractive and the purpose of those people, you're going to do some good things. And then here's the kicker. I keep reading that the prison facilities are in absolutely horrific shape, and they are. My unit was full of black mold because the roof leaked. The cement blocks, glass blocks that they had at one end, leaked. I mean, it was just, the black mold was just rampant. It was the same in the chow hall and in a number of other places. You've got an issue. You've got issues at every facility. So what do you do about it? Well, I don't think you need to go out and hire outside contractors. What I think you need to do is to start a training program for federal inmates by institution who are moderate to low risk, get them prepared on the outside, and run apprenticeship or training programs for the building trades. The building needs a new roof. Well, do we have any guys that are interested in roofers? And let's get an instructor from one of the trades or from a vocational school, any number of things, and let's get them trained and get them working. Put a new roof on. Do the same thing for kids who want to be electricians or HVAC or plumbers and pipe fitters. And plus you're getting them ready so that when they're released, they can go back out and they have a marketable skill. The other situation is to hire a food service training director at each facility. They're available. They're there. And to teach low to moderate or to minimum to low risk prisoners how to work in the food service, how to food prep, line cooks, sous chefs. I mean, you're getting people, when they're released, giving them a skill that they can go out and it's marketable. I mean, food service is crying for people. Building trades are crying for people. And you've got those resources available at every institution. All you need is a few instructors to do it and to work with these guys. And you've got to pay them, the instructors, and you've got to pay the guys that are learning, but you also have to pay the instructors. But if you've reduced the prison population to the extent that you can, then it's a very viable option. And it's a solution that is so simple that it's stupid. It's just stupidly simple. It's sitting right in front of you. And yet, how do you get these guys in Washington, D.C. to understand that the solution is looking them right square in the face? Folks, I don't know. But it's, how do you get the ear of Director Mitchell? This radio signal only goes about 10 miles. And, my podcast is there, but how do you get them to listen to the podcast so that you can hear what's going on? What are some reforms? You get the guys ready for jobs. Don't send them back into the same circumstances, same street, same house, same circumstance where they don't have a darn dime, and expect them to, don't get in trouble again, boys or girls. There are some very viable options, and the focus is on rehabilitation rather than incarceration. You can warehouse them all you want to, which is what they're doing. Get them ready to be productive members of society. Prepare people to fill jobs that are just needing to be filled right now. And in essence, you're helping yourself. You're giving guys, if you're in the food service, you're giving guys good food, nutritious food, good tasting food, and you're training guys that when they're released to go out and get good jobs. And then there are some reforms that are desperately needed. One of them is for incarcerated veterans. Those guys don't belong in federal prisons. Those guys are having trouble. Most of them, not all, but most, they're having an extremely difficult time transitioning back into normal society from the military. They don't belong in a federal prison because they committed a drug offense or something. They belong in a VA facility getting the mental health resources that they need. I think that is a priority. That's approximately 8,000 federal inmates are in that situation. Get them out of there. Get them where they can get help. They deserve it. For serving this country, they deserve all the help they can get. And the other one, which is near and dear to my heart, is Social Security reform. According to the Social Security Administration, you go to prison, you forfeit your Social Security benefits. So if you're unfortunate enough to have Social Security as your sole source of revenue, folks, you're in trouble. That assumes that you're just going to lose everything else that you have. If you have a car, you're going to lose your car. You're going to use your household goods because there's no money. And then you're supposed to be paying restitution for those of us who are doing that. How do you pay that with no revenue? How do you do that? And these guys at Social Security, well, you've got a bed, you've got food, you don't need your Social Security. No, but I should lose all my possessions, my home, my household goods, my card. The people who are reliant on my Social Security check for their housing, you're supposed to lose all that. Folks at Social Security, that is not your money. That is not your money. That is our money. We contributed to it for years and years and years. And for you to arbitrarily take that away is absolutely, positively immoral and unethical. And that is something that needs to be changed. And I think that's something that Congress is going to have to change. And even when they pass bills, like the First Step Act, in 2019 it was supposed to go into effect. It is still not in effect. Guys are in Texas calculating that good time by hand. What a bunch of garbage. What is wrong? No wonder you're rated last in the rating of federal alphabet agencies under the administration. President Trump, you need to really push prison reform because this is outrageous stuff. Confiscating your Social Security check or stopping your Social Security benefits because you're in prison, because you got meals and you got a bed, but you're supposed to lose everything else because they decided that they're going to stop your money. And then if they continue it while you're in prison, while you're incarcerated, well, you're going to have to pay it back. Oh, pick me. Because that's happening to me right now. I have to pay back a benefit that I qualified for, that I funded over 40 years of working. and they're going to take it away from me. President Trump, you need to put out an executive order to stop that, and get Speaker Johnson to put something out in one of the bills to rescind that, because that is outrageous. I mean, that's crippling. That is beyond the crime. It is beyond the restitution. I mean, that's just putting it to you just because they can. And I am outraged that continues, and it happened to me. It happened to so many of us. And those guys that are listening, you know who you are, and you know it just cannot continue. And then this from Derek Gilna, who puts out a newsletter for federal prisoners. Prisoners never get a holiday from incarceration. But the federal criminal justice system makes much more sense when it finally becomes clear that the main purpose of the system was not to do justice, but to settle scores, further political agendas, and create a lucrative federal bureaucracy. Case in point, commissaries at federal correction institutions. 2.5 years ago now, a tube of Sensodyne toothpaste, which is currently about $8 a tube. $15. $15. Two guys who are already struggling to make financial ends, who have to call home and say, hey, I need $25 or $50, because I need toothpaste, or I need aspirin, or I need any number of things. They take everything from you and make you purchase things that you need: aspirins, socks, T-shirts, snacks and food, coffee. It's outrageous. And then they go, well, we don't have any more money, so we can't get that stuff in there. Well, what are you doing with the profit? Is that going into somebody's pants? Is somebody pocketing that money? Inmates, they're paying for that. And then, well, we're out of money. Well, where'd the money go that's being used to purchase that stuff every week? Those are questions that need to be answered, and need to be answered quickly, because those people need to be held accountable. Yeah. This is not to minimize the seriousness of the duty of the federal government to protect Americans from international drug smuggling, sex trafficking, terrorism. But the dirty secret is that these offenders make up a very tiny percentage of federal prison occupants. The remainder are everyday offenders, mostly nonviolent, who would normally be prosecuted by the states, and others that the states would never target for prosecution. But, we got this little, we need to prove that we got a good conviction rate. So we're going to maintain that 97% conviction rate by threatening people and prosecuting people. And we use this little statute called conspiracy. Well, you should have known, or you did know, or you were ignorant of it, and you're purposefully ignorant. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that these guys do. And they're spending $60,000 a year of our tax money to keep people incarcerated in federal prisons, when in fact they could reduce that population probably by 50% with the stroke of a pen. Think of that. Reduce the population $60,000 a head for a year, reduce the prison population by 50% if they chose to. And yet these clowns, these ignorant, I can't use those terms on live radio, but they're opposing everything Director Mitchell is trying to do. I think the man's a good guy. I think he's trying very hard. But he is burdened with this bureaucracy and this staff that are just not going to cooperate with him. The unfortunate individuals who ran afoul of very broadly drafted federal criminal statutes that can snag the unsuspecting and can be misused to social or political advantage. Well, pick a lot of us, because I knew a ton of us that were in a federal prison that should not have been there. And it's just it's absolutely outrageous. You know, congressmen and senators for the past 40 years have built long and very profitable careers on sensationalized wars against offenders. And let's not forget the over 150,000 strong army of DOJ lawyers. 150,000 Department of Justice lawyers. FBI personnel and the alphabet soup of other federal law enforcement agencies where combined budgets is larger than the gross domestic product of over 30 countries. And let's not overlook the prison profiteers who make fortunes catering to this tax-funded bureaucracy. This is like many other federal agencies. I mean, they're just people making tons of money off this thing. We've got NGOs and consultants and all kinds of profiteers from this spending our tax dollars, absolutely wasting our tax dollars. You know, there are solutions, some of them not so simple, but there are solutions that can be implemented, and it's going to take some gumption and some work, but, you know, the solutions are there. Tell these federal prosecutors, go after the bad guys. You know, did this guy know what was going on, or did that guy know what was going on, or should he have known what was going on? You know, oh, gosh. And we give the actual perpetrator a break, while the conspiracy person who should have known knew absolutely nothing. I mean, that's absolutely ridiculous that goes on. And 150,000 lawyers. What in the world is going on? You know, solutions are so simple. You know, if the state chooses not to prosecute somebody, the states choose not to prosecute. But those little pipsqueak federal prosecutors are going to stand up there and show everybody just how tough and powerful they are. And then stand there and lie to your jury. Oh, yes. Excuse me, lie to the jury, 8, 10, 12 times on rebuttal closing arguments when there's not much you can do about it. Does that happen? That happens every day. And the incompetence of the bravado of federal prosecutors and the incompetence of defense attorneys is just mind-numbing. Absolutely mind-numbing. You know, Congress belatedly began to roll back, not entirely, the failed war on drugs in the name of racial justice, but merely diverted the power of the federal bureaucracy to prosecuting medical personnel. Doctors, nurses, administrators. I had 4 doctors in my unit of 50 guys. 4. And a pharmacist. Because they were pushing pills. Well, you know, every one of them reported everything to the government. Their reports were right, but they got, you know, well, you're painkillers. You're pushing drugs. Well, no, they weren't, and yet they went after these guys. You know, people who challenged established power structures, you know, and corrupt business practice of these offenders are duly prosecuted, convicted, and entered in a federal prison database. They are placed in the Federal Bureau of Prisons, a hotbed of drugs, cell phones, sexual abuse, and indifferent or non-existent medical treatment and mental health treatment, where they are only valuable to the extent of their numbers fuel a prison industrial complex that profits off their misery. You know, they do nothing. They do absolutely nothing. If you're elderly and ill, if you're minimum to low risk, which most federal prisoners are, you know, what are you doing there? You are non-productive. You're costing the taxpayer $60,000 a year. You're forfeiting your Social Security benefits if you're old enough. I mean, they send you there to die. Literally. Four MDs in my unit. And what do you think they did with them? Nothing. Dr. Mike was sweeping floors. Yeah, an MD sweeping floors. It's just outrageous. Instead of using their skills, well, they can't prescribe, but they can work with the nurse practitioners and make sure that the people are being seen, the right meds are being given out. I don't know if we had any mental health professionals in our unit, but nobody fessed up. But I'm going to tell you, there were a lot of guys in there with significant management experience that could have dramatically helped the administration manage that facility. And nothing. Or the CEOs in the kitchen helping facilitate enterprises having to deal with food. It's crazy. It's just nuts. It is nuts. And if you hadn't been there to see it, you'd sit there, the people sitting there who have no idea, you just shake your head. No, that stuff doesn't go on. I guarantee you. It goes on every day, 365 days a year. So, this is not the exception rather than the rule. This is the rule. And it goes on across all 120 facilities. So there are some very simple solutions to a very difficult problem. Normally it's the other way around. The problem is very simple, but the solution is complicated. The solution's not complicated in this particular set of circumstances. The solution is at hand. For decades, the federal prison population hovered around 50,000. Until the 80s, when numbers began to surge, hitting a peak of 225,000 in 2011. Well, it's now down to about 160,000. So it's coming down, but, how do you account for that? That's a lot of captive customers for the prison industrial complex. And despite the obvious abuses of the BOP, mainstream media largely has ignored the problems, save for only a few publications, such as the Prison Legal News, where this information is coming from. The adverse publicity surrounding the political prosecutions and prisoner abuse suffered by January 6 defendants and the legal prosecution of the president and media pieces like the 60 Minutes cross-examination of former Director Peters in a nationally televised interview from SCI Aliceville, it was clear that the national mood had begun to change, and many realized that locking up people on overbroad prosecutions was exposed for what it was: scapegoating, political prosecution, prosecutorial overreach, and just stroking the egos of so many federal prosecutors who just delight in taking you down. And one last thing now, one of the things you want to point to something, you can point to Peter Navarro and Steve Bannon. Navarro is my age, and he was unconstitutionally prosecuted and jailed for invoking the established doctrine of presidential privilege. And for standing on principle, he was confined in the general population at Miami, Florida. And it's just incredible what they do. They use things that should not be used and put people in prison on the flimsiest of charges. They cherry pick the evidence against you, and between that and incompetent counsel, you're done. You're toast. Your life is over because you didn't see it, you didn't understand it, you weren't aware of what's going on, or somebody, in order to cut themselves a deal, named you as a co-conspirator to get a deal, which is what happened to me, and which is what happens to a lot of us. So I just about burned up my half an hour, and I've had my ranting for the week, and it's time to say thank you and Thanks for listening. And I'm the guy they called the old guy, because I am. And I want you all to remember that unlike the brutal treatment we received, be sure and treat others with compassion, respect, and kindness. And should you have any comments or questions, you can email me at inmatealliance@yahoo.com. That's inmatealliance@yahoo.com. You can go on the web. And our new website is www.inmatealliance.org. You can pick us up podcasting on Podbeam or YouTube. Inmate Alliance Insider should direct you there. So I hope you'll tune in, spread the word, and help get the word out of what's going on with this whole thing.